tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 7th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets Rwby? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Salem looked overjoyed and looked at Thanatos with a bright smile on her face. Summer looked solemn as she stood near her daughters and her husband and Raven. Team Rwby and Team JNPR were, in short, amazed by what they saw, and the same could be said for every single person present. Except one. No, the god of light began to say with a sorrowful tone before it turned into one of anger. No. With a battle cry, the yellow god destroyed the purple chains holding him before looking at Thanatos with nothing but anger and fury. You killed my brother. Prepare to die, creature, the god of light snarled at the embodiment of death while he started to go high in the air, levitating. If it's a fight you want, then a fight you will get. But first, Thanatos answered before raising a hand in the air. Soon enough, from his open hand came out a wave of energy that caused everything around him to be covered in a greenish barrier. Lord Thanatos. What did you do? Summer asked the embodiment of death with some curiosity in her voice. I made sure my fight with him would not affect the area. I don't want to suffer any collateral damage, the embodiment of death retorted to the ghost before disappearing in thin air, not waiting for an answer. Soon he reappeared a few feet away from his opponent, levitating himself. The two fighters stared at one another for a moment before charging one another with battle cries. Their fists connected and sent a shockwave that pushed the two away from one another. The first one to recover was the god of light as he charged his opponent, but his attack was blocked. Thanatos countered by punching him in the guts, causing his enemy to gasp in pain. However, the yellow god quickly retaliated and soon the two exchanged blows at high speeds, under the amazed eyes of not only the people below but all around Remnant. After all, let's not forget that the reporters were still recording the whole scene. The punches were so strong that each time they collided, they created shockwaves that seemed to shock the very air. It's so intense. Pyrrha commented as her emerald eyes watched the two fighters repeatedly punching one another. That what I can call a fight. Young cried out with admiration as she pumped a fist in the air. So that's what a fight between gods look like, Glinda commented softly to herself as she gazed at the fighters with interest and amazement. Ironwood looked just as amazed as he watched the two engaged in a battle to the death. Raven and Taeyang were silent as themselves were observing the battle. DMN, I don't drink enough for this, Crow grumbled from his place as he glanced at his flask before taking a sip. Raven shot her brother a disgusted look before looking back at the fighting deities. John, Rwby, Blake, Weiss and the rest of the teenagers were silent as they watched the fight taking place. Blanche was looking at Thanatos with a hopeful expression on her face as she thought to herself. You can do this, please win. Back to Thanatos and the god of light, the two were trying to push the other away by using their respective strength. The embodiment of death had to admit that the yellow god was stronger than he thought. Look like it is time to be smart. A grin appeared on his face as he suddenly bragged hold of his opponent's fists before luring his opponent to him. The god of light groaned in surprise when Thanatos wreaked connect with his guts. Then without giving his opponent a chance to recover, the embodiment of death delivered a strong punch that caused his opponent to double over in pain. The punch was so strong it sent his enemy flying meters away from him. Shaking his head to get rid of the pain and possibly regain his composure, the god of light then looked back at his opponent, who looked back with a tiny smirk on his face. For a moment, nothing happened. Until the yellow god pressed his hands together. Thanatos blinked when he saw a ball of light slowly appearing between the hands of his enemy. With a battle cry, the god of light shot the blast toward his opponent who, like with the purple god, didn't try to dodge it. A loud gasp escaped the audience as they watched the embodiment of death disappearing inside a ball of pure light energy. The god of light looked smug as he crossed his arms in satisfaction. An expression that quickly disappeared once he saw his enemy, still alive and pretty unharmed. Thanatos had a look of respect on his face as he looked at his opponent. Blanche and Amber both released soft sigh of relief at seeing him unharmed, while Summer and Salem narrowed their eyes as if they saw something the others didn't. "Impressive, you actually managed to touch me," the embodiment of death began to say with some satisfaction clear in his voice. "What is he talking about?" Weiss asked her teammates and everyone present with confusion. "I don't know, he looks pretty good, nothing bad on him at all." Blake answered with a frown as she examined his body for any sign of injuries. "I think we are about to know the answer soon enough," Ironwood said calmly to everyone as himself was wondering what Death himself was talking about. "What are you on about? You have no bruises or bumps on you, creature." The god of light snarled at him with anger clear in his tone along with some surprise and confusion. Thanatos, instead of answering, smirking, as suddenly, his helmet broke in half under the eyes of everyone present. The pieces of it fell toward the ground, and the second they touched it, they became black mists. "See what I mean now? Unfortunately, you made a terrible mistake by destroying my helmet." Thanatos's smirk turned into a serious expression that caused many to flinch in fear. "Until now I took it all as a game, but now you just forced me to be serious." The embodiment of death's tone was similar to the coldest of ice as his body started to be surrounded by a blackish fire-like aura. Everyone paled in fear as a greater power radiated from his body, now completely covered in this black fire. His eyes were now living green fires. The god of light looked petrified for a moment, but then he regained his composure before doing something that shocked many people present. He transformed into a dragon. An eastern dragon to be exact. His horns were wider, longer, and more streamlined, and his body was now long and serpentine-like. The majestic dragon had a long mane of golden hair running the length of his body, forming a plume at the tip of his tail, as well as rather extensive facial hair that terminates in two feathery-tipped whiskers. Then he had glowing white eyes. The dragon roared loudly as he flied straight toward Thanatos, ready to attack and tear his opponent apart. "Harry! Lord Thanatos!" The embodiment of death heard their cries of distress but ignored it as he concentrated all his energy into his hands, slowly formed a dense ball of energy. As the golden dragon approached him, Thanatos then looked back at him before smirking. "Have a test of my new technique, terrible providence," he shouted loudly as he threw his hands forward toward the serpentine creature. The ball of energy, once launched, turned into an explosion beam the size of 5 people stacked on top of each other. The beam went straight toward the golden dragon, who sadly didn't have the time to dodge as he found himself disappearing inside it. However, everyone could hear cries of agony from the beam, but soon as to close their eyes to avoid being blinded by a bright light. For a few seconds, the cries of agony remained before abruptly stopping just as the light started to dim. Blinking a few times to be sure they weren't blind, the crowd all looked up to see Thanatos only. The golden dragon was nowhere in sight, and instead, they could see a cloud of ashes slowly descending down the air toward the ground. Then a ball of pure energy appeared in the air before entering slowly Thanatos' body. The embodiment of death closed his eyes with a sigh as he allowed the ball to mix with his very being, ignoring everything at the moment. On ground, the audience took them a moment to realize what had just happened. The god of light had been annihilated by the embodiment of death's attack, and Thanatos had absorbed his powers. Salem fell on her knees with nothing but pure joy on her pale face as she looked at Thanatos. After so many millenniums, her greatest wish came true. The Tun gods were no more. He did it. Rwby cried out in joy as she jumped repeatedly from her place, soon followed by the rest of the other students who started cheering Harry's name for his victory. Summer herself was cheering her lord for his rather easy victory. Blanche and Amber were crying in happiness as they looked at the embodiment of death, while Emerald couldn't retain herself for sighing deeply in relief by the fact he won. The Beacon staff, along with Taeyang, Raven, Gyra, Callie and Ironwood, all remained there with stunned expression on their faces. However, they soon joined in the celebration, maybe because the younger one's good mood was rather contagious. Ojban was the only one not cheering as he was staring at the embodiment of death with shock and fear, his mind still processing the fact that this man had killed the very beings that created their worlds. However, silence came again when they saw Thanatos himself slowly heading toward them with a stern expression on his face. Many shivered as they watched him approaching, and one question was starting to fill everyone's mind. What is going to happen now? As Thanatos slowly descended towards them, everyone watched him approach nervously. After the short battle they saw between Death and the twin gods, no one wanted to challenge him. Blanche, was thinking about what to do as she looked at the more mature version of the young man she loved with some nervousness. The white wolf Faunus was still a bit shocked about the fact Harry James Potter never existed but instead was a clone created by the embodiment of Death himself. She was also shocked about the fact Amber knew about it. Her own friend knew of her boyfriend's true identity and never once tried to told her. Internally, she promised to have some answers from not only Amber but Thanatos if possible. Rwby, and the rest of the students were following Thanatos' descent with wariness in their eyes. Sure, some of them were in awe at being in the presence of such a powerful individual, but many felt nothing but fear as they were in the presence of death itself. Penny Polandina, being an android, was still in shock as nothing in her database prepared her for what happened moments ago. After all, nothing in her database suggested that powerful entities such as the twin gods or death existed, so it was no surprise. Kira was scared to the core. Why? Because after the truth came out, the redhead was afraid of having offended Death by fighting him repeatedly. John, seeing her fear, gently pulled her against him in a comforting embrace which she appreciated greatly. Yang, in contrary, was glad to not have fought against him, same thing for a good portion of people present. Rwby, her younger sister, stared at Thanatos with fear but also with stars in her silver eyes. Being the child she was, it was not a surprise to be in awe at seeing a creature no one thought existed. Weiss was shivering as her skin turned even paler. The heiress of the Schnee Dust Company couldn't believe what she saw and learned so far, despite the fact it definitely happened. After all, like many people on Remnant, she believed that gods and supernatural things didn't exist except in fairy tales. Looked like it was not the case. After all, it was difficult to deny something when you see it with your own eyes. Blake Belladonna felt nothing but fear as she looked at the approaching embodiment of death with wide eyes and pale skin. As the man came closer, she went to stand with her parents, who had the same expressions that her on their faces. However, the cat Faunus and her family would be lying to themselves if they said they weren't amazed by the current situation. Glinda, was sweating profusely as her green eyes watched the man slowly approaching them. Her skin was pale, deadly pale. She might be a stern teacher and headmistress, but ever knew that she stood no chance against a literal god. The same could be said for the Beacon staff, except for Oblek, who internally was bouncing in childish amazement. Crow was shivering madly as he stood next to Taeyang and Raven, whose eyes showed nothing but uneasiness and fright. Which was understandable seeing that they were facing death itself. Ironwood, while being shocked and a bit frightened by the entire situation, couldn't help but thinking about something less than good. It is time to create some new weapons. Behind him, some of the Elysian soldiers and White Fang thugs started panicking, especially at the sight of Thanatos' stern expression. A few people could be seen starting praying, hoping to not be severely punished for past crimes they might have committed in the past. Summer, was snickering in amusement as she saw the faces everyone around her were making at the moment. She was among the few people to know that the embodiment of death, while being stern, powerful and a bit of a sadistic bstrd and proud of it, was also someone with a big heart. Salem, for her part, was still on her knees, crying in happiness at the fact the gods were no more, all thanks to Thanatos. She was now forever in his debt in this life and another if she somehow got reincarnate. Shooting a glance away from her lord, the Queen of Grimm looked toward her former love, who had a look of pure fear on his face. If she still was the naive woman who loved him, Salem would have comforted him to make him feel better, but this woman died millenniums ago, all thanks to the god in him. Looking away from Ozma, Salem smiled as Thanatos landed on the ground, his neon green eyes looking at everyone present with a sternness that could scare her mightiest grim. She internally gulped in fear herself at the sight, and after shooting a glance at the other people present, she could see that it was also the case for them. Suddenly, Glinda, Crow, Oobleck and Peter started bowing with respect and deference, and they were soon joined by Gyra, Callie, Ironwood, and their respective soldiers. Rwby and her team, along with the rest of the other students, all followed, no wanting to disrespect Thanatos and be the subjects of his wrath. No, the embodiment of Death's command caused everyone to pause before looking at him with surprise. "You do not need to bow to me," Thanatos said with a tiny smile, breaking the stern facade in the process. Many blinked in surprise at those words before slowly straightening up, but while a few of them looked at him with relief and some joy, the fear and respect still shined in their eyes. Well, in most eyes. Why? Because one of the young adults looked at Thanatos with stars in her eyes, and instantly she broke away from the others to lunge at the embodiment of death. "You did it. You were incredible." Thanatos rolled her eyes in fond amusement as he felt a pair of arms wrapping around his form, or at least tried to. "Trust Amber to still act like a child from time to time." "Isn't Rwby supposed to be the child here?" the embodiment of death inquired the Fall Maiden with a smirk of amusement. The silver-eyed girl in question cried out in indignation as she pouted childishly at him. Many started laughing at this, and awkwardness of the moment was broken thanks to this. "Harry," a voice called out shyly, which caused everyone to stop laughing to stare at who spoke. Thanatos frowned a bit when he saw the familiar form of Blanche Moonflower approaching him. The embodiment of death didn't like the expression of hesitation and nervousness currently on the wolf faunus face. "Blanche," he called back in a soft tone and an expression of pure love in his eyes as she stopped in front of him. "So this is the real you, huh?" the white wolf faunus asked him in a soft tone as her yellow eyes started examining him. Despite the fact he looked to be in his early 20s, had a strange green marking on his forehead which bore an uncanny resemblance to the symbol left by the portal that sucked in the god of darkness, was 12 feet tall and had neon green eyes instead of emerald green. He was the same man she grew to love. "Yes, it is," Thanatos answered softly while still looking at her with kindness and love, but also regret and what that resignation in his eyes. Blanche blinked at that before a flash of realization passed through her yellow eyes. The embodiment of death must be sad because he had lied to her, and resigned because he might be thinking that she was about to leave him for that. There was no other explanation, and while she was a bit angry by the fact he hid such informations from her, she still loved him dearly. A loving smile soon appeared on her face as she looked up at him. "Once you told me since the day I met you, I never thought you would be even more gorgeous than you already were, but I'm glad to be wrong," Blanche began to say with a fond smile before adding. "Today I'm saying this, since the day I met you, I never thought you would be even more handsome than you already were, but I'm glad to be wrong." Thanatos blinked at those words before chuckling a bit. Just with some words, all his fear faded away like snow under the sun, replaced with pure love. "So you don't mind me being well, Death?" he asked her with a raised brow while crossing his arms over his chest. "Not really, but," Blanche said before jumping. Thanatos blinked when the white wolf faunus slapped him on the right cheek, even if he didn't feel pain at all. In fact, even when Blanche landed on her feet, his cheek looked normal instead of red and marked with a handprint. "That was for hiding me who you truly are," Blanche began to say before punching him in the guts with no effects again. "This is for scaring the hell out of me earlier," she added with a stern expression on her face. "And this," she cried out, seemingly in anger before jumping again at him. The embodiment of death blinked when he felt a pair of arms wrapped around his neck and lips pressed against his own. Behind them, everyone stared at the scene with bewilderment, shock and surprise, except for some people who merely smiled tenderly at the scene taking place before them. "This is for me," Blanche whispered with a playful wink after pulling her lips away from his. "You cheeky little wolf," Thanatos said teasingly with a chuckle, shaking his head a bit. Blanche smirked at him toothily as her tail wagged behind her before giving him another peck on the lips. Soon enough, she released her hold on his neck, and once her feet touched the ground again, she looked up at him with narrowed eyes. However, we will have a serious talk later, mister, she growled at him. Yes, ma'am, the embodiment of death answered with a roll of his eyes and a shake of his head. Behind them, snickers could be heard from the other teenagers, which caused Thanatos to shoot them a brief glare that managed to shut some of them except for Team Rwby, Pyrrha, John and Emerald. Grumbling under his breath, Thanatos's face then turned serious as he looked at Summer Rose, who was standing near her family. Summer Rose stepped forward, he called her out strongly. Hearing this, the ghost gulped nervously before approaching him with her family, looked back and forth between the embodiment of death and Summer. Once she stopped before him, Thanatos didn't say anything as he slowly raised a finger from his left hand before touching her forehead with it. Soon enough, everyone gasped when they saw Summer's transparent body turning more and more alive-like, and soon a seemingly living Summer stood before them. The former leader of Team STRQ looked at herself with wide eyes before looking at her lord with a questioning look. Summer Rose, for helping me and Salem in our quest, I, Thanatos, allow you to remain in the mortal plane for a month so you can be with your family one last time. Thanatos declared solemnly but with a smile on his face. Summer's silver eyes grew as large as plates at those words before a squeal of happiness escaped her mouth. Soon, she rushed toward the embodiment of death before hugging him as best as she could, which wasn't easy considering the size difference, thanking him repeatedly as tears fell down her cheeks. Thanatos chuckled in amusement as he patted the top of her head before watching as she quickly rushed toward her family, who engulfed her into a group hug. The embodiment of death, along with many people present, smiled tenderly at the scene, but then he cleared his throat loudly, catching everyone's attention. Raven Branwen stepped forward. At those words, Yang's mother blinked in surprise, taken aback by this, but slowly approached him. Crow looked at his sister with hidden excitement as he hoped that Raven would be punished, but what she got instead caused him to be shocked to the core. Raven Branwen, for helping me and Salem in our quest, I, Thanatos, owe you a favor. If you need help or a service in the future, don't hesitate to call me. Yang's mother bowed her head once those words escaped his lips, while internally being shocked to have been given such an honor, a favor from Death. I only want one thing, Lord Death, Raven began to say, which caught Thanatos' attention. I want my tribe to be safe, was her next words. Thanatos nodded at her before closing his eyes as he extended a hand forward. From the palm of his hands, everyone watched in silence as a small brown bag appeared in thin air. Reopening his eyes, the embodiment of death smiled as he handed the bag to the leader of the Branwen tribe. This bag contains runes, place one at each side of your camp, and no one will be able to see OT nor will be able to hear what happened in it, Thanatos explained in a gentle tone, which caused many to stare at the bag with shock. Ironwood's eyes shined as he immediately thought of trying to create the equal same thing. It would be wonderful if Atlas could possess such a weapon. Hearing this, Raven's eyes shined a bit as she slowly picked the bag, thanking him softly before going back to stand with Summer and Taeyang. Crow stared at his sister with wide eyes before looking back at Thanatos with slight anger. The embodiment of death merely narrowed his eyes at him, and the man quickly turned his head away in fright. Satisfied, Thanatos then turned his head to look at someone else. Salem, approach, he called out gently. Blinking, the Queen of Grimm slowly did what she was told as she went to stand in front of the one who helped her achieving her goal. I promised you to break your curse once the gods are deal with, Thanatos began to say in a stern tone before adding with a soft smile. And today, I honor this promise. Hearing this, Salem's eyes showed nothing but gratitude as she looked at her lord with a bright smile. Smiling down at her, Thanatos then pressed a finger against her forehead before saying in a language no one recognized. I, Thanatos, thank you for your help and friendship, and I break the curse placed upon you and give you back your true appearance. As those words escaped his mouth, Salem found herself levitating in the air as her body was engulfed into a bright light. The light was so strong that everyone present had to cover their eyes to avoid being blinded by it. Thanatos, was unaffected by this, and his neon green eyes watched what was going on while a smile grew on his face. Soon enough, the light dimmed and everyone could watch again. What they saw caused many to gasp in shock. Salem's appearance had totally changed, she now had fair skin, pale platinum blonde hair and light blue eyes. Most of her hair was worn in a half-updone bun style with a small, simple bun on the top, and the remainder of her long, straight hair hanging at the bottom. Most of her bangs were tied back, barring some large locks that framed the left side of her face. No longer she looked like a humanized Grimm, now she looked like a normal human being. Her attire was still the same but her appearance had changed. Salem looked at her body with shock and happiness for a moment before looking up at her lord with gratefulness in her blue eyes. Ashbin stared at the scene in shock, his eyes couldn't leave Salem's new appearance. He couldn't believe that the curse placed upon her by the god of light himself was broken with just the touch of a finger. The headmaster had never felt so afraid before. "You look much better now, my friend," Thanatos commented with a smile and a wink. The previous Queen of Grimm smiled at him with appreciation before asking, "Can I ask you a question, my lord?" "You just did, but yes you can," the embodiment of death responded with a playful smirk which caused some people to snort in amusement. Salem rolled her eyes again at this but opened her mouth to say, "My lord, what will happen to the Grimm now? Without me or the god of darkness, they will dissipate." "No, they will not. Sure, they were created by the purple hothead, but thanks to all the time without his presence, they grew to be less dependent of him. Sure, you controlled them for a time, but this was it. You don't create them, so they will now follow their nature," Thanatos explained calmly with a shrug. "Will you destroy them all then?" John asked him with a frown as he held Pyrrha against him. "No," was his answer. "What? Why?" Many cried out in shock and slight anger at the words. Thanatos' eyes narrowed dangerously as he looked at them and they instantly flinched in fear. "Because they are part of one of the delicate balances of remnant. If the creatures of Grimm disappeared, humanity would grow in number and draw even more on the resources of this world, and in time, remnant would become a desolate and lifeless land," the embodiment of death explained in a somber tone that sent shivers down everyone's spines. "Worse, without the Grimm, humanity and Faunaskind will enter into more conflicts than usual. It will definitely lead into another war, and this time, there will be not only for world domination but for the resources as well." "Liar. Remnant has limitless resources." Ashbin snarled at Thanatos with narrowed eyes. The embodiment of death turned his head to stare at him with a bored expression on his face as he said those words, "Nothing is limitless, just as I proved earlier that everything can die." The headmaster of Beacon felt a shiver at the reminder but stayed strong as he sneered at him those words. "Everything can die, you say? So that's mean you can as well." Many people started to pull out their weapons but were all stopped on the spot when Thanatos spoke again in a calm tone. "It's possible, but I'm sure it won't be before a long time." There was a bit of melancholy in his tone but then glared daggers at Ashbin as the man snarled. "What is that supposed to mean? I am death. If I'm not here to make sure people are well dead, then this world will be overloaded with people and remnant will not have enough resources to provide everyone in it," Thanatos explained calmly with the sternness in his eyes caused many to shiver in slight fear. "So you do kill people?" Ashbin snarled at him again with a strange glint in his eyes. "For millenniums I have lived, and yet I only directly took the lives of a handful of people, the rest died naturally," Thanatos began to say calmly before his eyes brightened a bit with power, causing Ashbin to froze on the spot. "My main duty is to judge the souls entering my domain. I don't care what people do in their lives, but once they enters the underworld." He paused at the last part as he glared down at Ashbin, who was shivering in fear while staring at him with wide eyes. Behind him, the other people present were silent as their minds were processing what they just heard. Some of them looked shocked by what Thanatos just revealed, and two people among them widened their eyes in not only shock but also anger. "Excuse me? You said you took the lives of a handful of people, right?" Weiss asked him after a second of hesitation. The heiress of the SDC stiffened when neon green eyes looked away from Ashbin's form to stare at her. She was internally thankful that there was no anger in his eyes as he nodded at her, not saying anything. "By any chances, have you taken the lives of people recently?" Weiss asked him with a firm expression on her face, even if we could hear the nervousness in her voice. "I did." "By any chances, were they named Jacques Schnee and Roman Torchwick?" Ironwood inquired him with slight anger in his tone. Clearly, he was still frustrated about the criminal's death as he wanted Roman to pay for his crimes. Thanatos hummed in contemplation as he ticked his chin in thoughts. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence until it was broken by the embodiment of death who opened his mouth to answer the general. I'll have to check my register for this Torchwick, but for Jacques I admit that I took his life. His confessions caused many to stare at him in shock. Salem merely glanced at him with a raised brow. She knew that he had taken Roman's life, but seeing the twinkle in his eyes, he was only doing this to annoy the general. Why? Weiss asked him in a soft tone. Surprisingly, there was no anger in her tone, just surprise. Over the years, I have judged countless of souls, many of them were Faunus who died in Jacques' minds, Thanatos began to say with a sorrowful sigh before resuming. I didn't thought to take his soul at first, but when I started to have children visiting my domain I decided that it was enough. Life is a precious thing, and yet, your father didn't care about the lives he was destroying for his own gains. A scowl soon grew on his face as he added coldly, once his soul arrived in my domain I almost lost my cool, as Jacques Schnee was one of the most distasteful people I have the pleasure to judge. Many Faunus and even some Atlesian soldiers, Ironwood included, nodded their heads in agreement along with Weiss herself. Heck, even some of the Beacon staff looked in agreement to his words. Turning his head away from Weiss, Thanatos then looked toward Salem before asking, "Are you ready?" At first, she looked at him in confusion, but then a flash of remembrance passed through her blue eyes. "Yes, I am. Remember, you will have to pass some time in the limbo," the embodiment of death told her in a soft tone. "I know, but I would do anything as long as I get to see my babies again," Salem answered with sincerity. Thanatos nodded at her in understanding before waving his hand toward a spot at her right. Instantly from the ground, appeared a very familiar symbol, the same one he had on his forehead that started glowing in a greenish color before it turned into a portal. Salem shot one last look at everyone and a somewhat triumphant look at Ojben, whose face reddened in anger before entering the portal. Soon, she disappeared in a bright light, leaving behind the embodiment of death, her former love and the others. Once she disappeared, Thanatos turned his eyes toward Ojben, his face turning grave and stern before opening his mouth to say, "Ozma, it is time for you to suffer punishment for your actions." The headmaster of Beacon blinked at those words before asking with confusion and anger, "What are you talking about?" "You know very well what I mean," the embodiment of death started to say coldly before adding as he pointed a finger toward the man. "From this day on, like Salem, the curse placed upon you is no more." At those words, a white ray shot out of his finger before heading straight the headmaster. Ojben barely had the time to blink before pain filled his body. For a full minute, he trashed and screamed, but then it all stopped and everyone could see him simply laying there, panting. "This is your last life, Ozma. Once you die, and you will, your soul will not take another's body again. You will end straight to my domain where you will be judge." "And why aren't you doing it now, creature?" Ojben snarled at him defiantly, but his body was still shaken by the pain he felt. "I think some people would love to have a little chat with you first," Thanatos said with a smirk before looking over at his friends. "Sorry everyone, but I have to go, duty calls and all, but I will return," he told them gently, but his eyes were focused on Blanche's form. "That anything. I know you will, because I will eviscerate you if you don't, mister." The white wolf Faunus snarled playfully at him and he smirked back at her before disappearing in thin air. Once he was gone, Ojben suddenly felt dread entering his body and paled drastically when he saw everyone staring at him with anger and narrowed eyes. The headmaster of Beacon gulped loudly in fear as soon, he was entirely covered by their shadows. The man swore that he heard a sadistic cackle in the air. Thanatos watched with a smile as Salem was hugging her beloved daughters. After arriving at his palace, he had found the formerly Queen of Grimm eyeing the hall with wide eyes of shock, amazement and stupor. He didn't fault her for this, as no one knew of such a place until they died at it. Earlier, he had to judge the souls of many members of the BLD Fong with Adam Taurus at its head. All of them except for a handful ended up in the Inferno. Those who escaped it ended up either in Oblivion Adam or in the Limbo. Anyway, like he promised her, he had then used his powers to summon her daughters who, upon seeing her, instantly rushed toward her, engulfing their mother into a tight hug. Salem had cried in happiness at being held by her babies again after so long and shot her lord a grateful look. The embodiment of death might be many things: a sadistic bstrd, a living powerhouse, a charmer, etc., but heartless was not one of them. Thanatos, as he watched the reunion, couldn't help but wondering if one day, he will also have children to call his own. Maybe if Blanche was willing. But then another thought entered his head: Blanche was mortal and him the total contrary. While he would live for another good millennium or more, the white wolf Faunus would be lucky she got older than 90 years old. Then he absently stared at his right hand, where a ball of light appeared in his palm. The powers of the god of light was his to do as he fits, and the same could be said from the god of darkness' own powers, but he didn't like it. Thanks to his victory over the twin, he was now the only living, divine entity on Remnant. The embodiment of life was no more, and while he possessed the god of light's power, Thanatos refused to have another responsibility. He was after all the embodiment of death and had been since the birth of Remnant. That, and he had already too much responsibility on his shoulders. Then, as if the universe heard his silent internal conflict, an idea sprouted in his head. What if he could insert the power of life and creation in someone's body? The god of light was arrogant and didn't deserve the power he inherited. Maybe someone should have it. In this way, the power of death and life will be equal and the balance will be respected, an embodiment of death himself and an embodiment of life. What of the power of destruction from the god of darkness? Sighing to himself, Thanatos closed his eyes as he focused on the powers he received from the purple hothead, and soon enough, he felt half of its power merging with the ball of light while the other half stayed within his body. Satisfied with his work, the embodiment of death then dismissed the ball before looking back at Salem and her daughters. "It is time," he said simply in a calm tone. The former Queen of Grimm looked back at her lord with some pain in her eyes but nodded in acceptance as she made her way toward the blue door that led to the limbo, her new home. Her daughters looked ready to tear up, and some of them looked toward him with pleading expressions on their faces. They wanted to stay with their mother. Thanatos stared at them for a second before sighing deeply. Those little ones were too cute for their own goods. Besides, he had been thinking about something for a while now, so maybe he could kill two birds with one stone. "Salem," he called sternly, and the woman in question, who was about to open the door, stopped dead on her track before looking at him questioningly. "I have an offer for you," the embodiment of death began to say calmly. "An offer, my lord? I want you to become the guardian of Limbo. You will be in charge of the souls there and will have the duty to report to me when you think a soul is ready to be judged again. You will have the possibility to go to Elysium to visit your daughters whenever you want. What say you?" Salem stared at Thanatos with wide eyes of shock for a moment before a bright smile appeared on her face. "It would be an honor, my lord. I will try my best to satisfy you," the woman declared to him before she found herself being hugged on all sides by her daughters. Thanatos smiled as he clapped his hands once in satisfaction. "Wonderful. If you agree, you will start your job in 2 days. It will give you the time to being acquainted with your surroundings." Salem nodded at him in acceptance. The embodiment of death then approached her before putting a finger against her right shoulder. Soon enough, a familiar symbol appeared on it. "It will allow you to go anywhere you want in my domain, but fair warning, don't enter the black door unless you want to meet oblivion." Hailing at those words, the former Queen of Grimm promised to not enter that place. Thanatos nodded at her before allowing her to go to Elysium so she could have some time with her daughters. Once the five passed through the white door, the embodiment of death sighed before disappearing in thin air. He had a promise to respect after all. Elsewhere. Meanwhile, in Vale, doctors and nurses were taking care of the people who got wounded during the Grimm invasion. Ojben had been taken into custody for questioning while the Beacon staff started to help for reconstruction. Raven, Crow, and Taeyong also decided to help alongside an excited Summer Rose. Most of the students were okay, but some were still being taken care of by medics. Those who weren't either went to help in the reconstruction or went to see their friends and family. Team Rwby along with Blanche, Emerald and Amber, were all standing with Pyrrha and John as the two went to see their comrades in the infirmary, Nora and Ren. After being told of what had happened, it was no surprise that the two were shocked to hear that their friend Harry James Potter was in fact Death himself. Nora had complained loudly about how unfair it was for her to have been there to see the battle between Harry Thanatos and the twin gods of Remnant. Afterwards, wanting some answers, questions were asked to not only Amber but Emerald as well. Team Rwby, Team JNPR and Blanche were taken aback by the answer they got, about Amber being the Fall Maiden, the attempt to steal it by a mad woman named Cinder Fall, Amber's meeting with Thanatos and the things that happened afterwards. The little group had been silent for a time as their minds processed what they just learned. Of course, Amber got an earful from Blanche as the White Wolf was angry at her friend for not telling her anything about her lover. Emerald herself got an earful from many people present with Weiss at the lead. After all, thievery was not something everyone looked up with acceptance. "Do you think you will come back?" Blake asked her teammates and friends as they sat together in a circle. Her parents had left a while ago with some of their guards to retrieve the bodies of Adam and his followers by the orders of Sienna Khan. That's left her with plenty of time to discuss with her friends. Rwby, Yang, Weiss, Nora, Ren, Pyrrha and John along with Blanche, Emerald and Amber all stared at the cat Faunus at the question. They knew who she was talking about of course, but yet. "You know, I still can't believe we were friends with Death of all things," John muttered from his seat as he used a hand to ruffle his hair. "Yeah, no wonder he was so strong," Ren answered with a nod of agreement. "And why he was so cool," Rwby added with a sigh before looking at her partner in crime. "Weiss, I'm surprised that you haven't screamed at him for you know. A part of me wants to be angry at him for being the cause of my father's death, but for the most part, I'm grateful he did, because if he didn't, nothing would have changed at all and the White Fang would still be terrorists," the heiress explained to the youngest girl with sincerity in her eyes. "That's true, morbid but true," Yang agreed with a nod before looking over at Blanche. "I bet you feel like the luckiest girl in the world." The White Wolf Faunus blinked for a second before looking at the blonde with a frown of confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have Death himself as your boyfriend. The look of amazement on your face when he arrived was a dead giveaway." Groans echoed from the group at the pun except Amber, who snorted in amusement. "It was a terrible pun." Blake hissed at her partner with narrowed eyes. "No, it wasn't. My pun was deadly good." Yang's answer caused more groans to escape them. "Rwby, tell your sister to stop." Nora told the youngest girl present with what looked like a pleading look on her face, and Ren nodded his head fervently in agreement. "Yang, stop." Rwby flatly told her sister, who pouted like a child as she crossed her arms under her bust. "You guys are no fun," the blonde brawler from Team Rwby whined childishly at them. "Maybe, but thanks to you, Yang, I'm literally dying of laughter here," Amber commented with a toothy smirk. Groans of exasperation echoed from the group while Yang laughed loudly with humor. Emerald slapped her head with a hand, muttering to herself. "Why did my girlfriend have to have such a lousy sense of humor?" Hearing this, the Fall Maiden smirked as she used an arm to grab Emerald's shoulders before pulling her closer to her. "But at least I have one, my appealing Emerald," Amber cooed fondly to the thief, who blushed madly at the nickname before glaring daggers at the others as they started snickering at her. "To answer you, Yang, yes, I'm proud of who my lover is. Not many girls can openly say that they are in love with Death himself," Blanche began to say with a wolfish grin as her tail wagged behind her. "True," Weiss and Blake both said at the same time before nods. Before more could said, however, someone entered the room. Well, more like people entered the room: Raven, Taeyang, Summer, Glinda, Crow, Callie and two other people. "Mom! Winter!" Weiss cried out in shock as Willow Schnee herself lunged at her daughter with tearful eyes. "Oh, my baby! I was so worried when I heard the news." "Are you hurt?" the concerned mother asked her with pure maternal worry, while her other daughter stepped forward with an equal look of concern. "I'm fine," Weiss replied shyly while shooting a glare toward her teammates as their eyes showed nothing but amusement at her predicament. Yang then looked toward Raven, who returned the look with an expression of hidden concern. Earlier, the two of them had a little discussion mainly about why Raven had to leave her husband and daughter behind. While the blonde understood her reason and forgave her for that, she still didn't like it. "Are you alright, children?" Glinda asked them all with a straight face, but we could see the worry shining in her eyes. The blonde deputy headmistress might be a stern and professional individual, but she still had a soft side, albeit she barely showed it. Yes, they all responded at the same time with nods. "What a good way to break the ice between us," Yang couldn't help but cooed from her seat. Groans echoed from the group, adults included. Much to the brawler's surprise, Summer was snickering in amusement. "Is she always like this?" Callie asked her daughter while pointing at Yang. Unfortunately, Blake, Weiss and Rwby along with John and Pyrrha all grumbled at the same time, with Ren nodding in agreement. Yang pouted at them, glaring at everyone present before Summer took over with a smirk. "I found it be really punny. Grim DMNIT Summer." Crow and Glinda both cried out in exasperation while the others all groaned at the horrible pun except Yang, who laughed loudly in humor. Now we knew where she got her sense of humor from. Summer rose. "Summer, I love you dearly, but please stop." Taeyong pleaded his revived wife as he literally went on his knees. Shocking enough, Crow did the same, adding, "Yes. We already have a person with a horrible sense of humor. No need to add more." "Hey!" Yang cried out in indignation just as Summer narrowed her eyes at the two, saying dangerously, "Oh, I have terrible sense of humor, huh?" Crow gulped as he realized what he just said as raised placating hands. "Well, you see," he tried to say, but then stopped when he heard a snort coming from none other than Raven Branwen. Crow shot her a glare, but she was totally unfazed by it and only smirked at him in amusement. Looking away from his sister, he looked at everyone present who were also grinning at him. Then he stared pleadingly at Taeyong for some support, but instead he got something else. "You are on your own, pal," Rwby's and Yang's father said to his comrade as he backed away from his angered wife, whose silver eyes were glued on Crow's form. The man stared at his friend with shock before looking back at Summer as sweat fell profusely from his eyes. Fortunately for him, he was saved from whatever his former leader had in mind when two other people entered the room, Gyra Belladonna and another person that caused Blake and Blanche to stiffen in surprise. The newcomer was a female, Bengal tiger faunus with amber eyes, dark complexion and wild black and chin-length hair. Like Blake and Blanche, she had a pair of ears, but her body was adorned with numerous tiger stripes-like marks. She was wearing 4 golden earrings on 3 of her ears as well as a small jewel on her forehead. She was also wearing a form-fitting dark gray sleeveless top with white trim with a large diamond cut out of the back exposing most of her back, accompanied by a smaller diamond-shaped cutout just above her melons. In addition, a long gray skirt with white accents which was shaped inwards towards her calves and her over-the-knee black stockings with golden trim alongside 2 long splits on the side which revealed a pair of black shorts. Over the dress, she wore a back-revealing long red cape clasped by golden accessories as well as a gray waist cincher with red trim that had a black golden buckled belt over it. Aside from all that, she also possessed a pair of light gray wedged sandals that had red laces which were tied to her calves, as well as a black elbow-length fingerless glove on her right hand. She also had a red rope with a golden bell on her left side wrapped around her waist with a matching rope wrapped around her right wrist. Blanche was stunned as she knew who it was, Sienna Khan, the leader of the White Fang. Sienna, Willow greeted the newcomer with a tiny smile. Willow, Sienna greeted her back with a smile of her own before looking at everyone present with calm. When her eyes fell on Blake, the latter stiffened in slight fear but calmed down when the tiger faunus spoke in a gentle tone. "I'm not here to sermon you from leaving the Fangs, Blake." "Then why are you here?" Blake hesitantly asked her, but still showed respect both in tone and behavior. "To collect the bodies of Adam Taurus and his men while they had betrayed the White Fang, they still deserved a proper burial," Sienna explained in a soft tone as emotions showed in her eyes. Many nodded their heads in understanding at those words. But then something unexpected happened. "Oh really? It had nothing to do with you wanting to see winter?" Willow asked the tiger faunus with a tiny smirk. Sienna, hearing this, blushed madly, spluttering in denial, and Winter's face turned redder than a tomato while trying her best to not look at the tiger faunus. Everyone else just stared at the two in shock except Gyra, Callie and Willow, who all smirked. Sienna and Winter shot them a glare with their faces still red in embarrassment, but sadly, their expressions had no effect on the trio, who kept smirking like idiots, amused by the whole thing. "I hope I'm not coming at a bad time," a masculine voice echoed from nearby, causing everyone present to jump in slight surprise, taken aback by the intrusion. Turning their heads toward where the voice came from, they saw a large cloud of mist forming a few feet away from them. They watched with wide eyes as a familiar armored figure appeared in the middle of the mist. Like the last time they met him, he was 12 feet tall in height, but they weren't bothered by it anymore. Harry. Yep, they still stick with the name he gave his clone and the name his parents gave him millenniums ago. Thanatos. Amber called out with a bright smile on her face. Sienna, Winter and Willow, who didn't met him before, instantly bowed in respect, knowing who he was. The embodiment of death smiled at his friends before glancing briefly at the three. "Rise, like I said before, you have no need to bow before me." His voice was filled with slight irritation and kindness. While three women slowly went back on their feet, Thanatos looked at Blanche with a smile. "As I promised, I'm back," he said with a tiny smirk and a twinkle in his eyes. Blanche rolled her eyes in amusement at this, but smiled as well as she replied back, "Yes, you are, and you know you do look better without that helmet." "Well then, I will not rebuild it," Thanatos retorted with a grin and a wink, which caused Blanche to smirk back at him toothfully as her tail wagged behind her in pleasure. "Wow!" Nora whispered in shock as she stared at the newcomer while Ren's eyes were analyzing him from head to toes. This armor of his was like nothing he had seen before, but he had to admit that it was both appealing and intimidating. "Excuse me?" Willow called out softly from her place beside her daughters. The embodiment of death, hearing this, turned his head to stare at her with an impassive look on his face, his neon green eyes shining like living fires. Taking a deep breath to get rid of her uneasiness, the current CEO of the SDC gathered all her courage to speak in a calm and collected tone. "I want to thank you." "What for?" Thanatos asked her with a frown of confusion. "For not only saving our world from whatever those gods planned to do, but also for the kind words you said about us, mortals," Willow Schnee answered with a tiny smile on her face, but still speaking with deference. "You shouldn't thank me, I only did what I had to, and maybe because those twins had it coming," the embodiment of death replied with a shrug. "Oh. So you didn't fight those gods to save a certain white wolf?" Young asked sweetly from her seat while glancing at Blanche, who shot her an exasperate glare. "You are the one to talk, firecracker. If you were in my place and Blake was Blanche, you would have done the same," Thanatos calmly retorted to the blonde brawler of Team RWBY. Hearing, Young and Blake blushed madly, and while everyone was laughing with humor, the two of them glared at him with red faces of embarrassment. "What? Even a mole could see how much the two of you like each other. Same for Ruby and Weiss, or Amber and Emerald," the embodiment of death began to say before pausing as a tiny smirk grew on his face. The same could be said for these two. At those words, he was looking at Winter and Sienna, who both blushed again madly, avoiding each other's eyes. "My lord, please, can you stop embarrassing everyone?" Summer asked him with a smirk. "Maybe in a few minutes," Thanatos responded, which caused some people to widen their eyes in fear before screaming loudly. "No." The embodiment of death snorted at the reactions. Before his face turned serious. Upon seeing this, many became a bit worried and some could be seen glancing at one another with slight concern. "Harry?" Blanche called out softly to him, wondering what was going on with him now, and Amber looked just as concerned. "My lord?" Summer called out in the same tone from her place near her family. Thanatos took a deep breath before opening his mouth to speak again. "I am here to restore balance." "What balance?" Sienna asked him curiously. "The balance between life and death," was her answer. Hearing this, some people instinctively glanced at Summer, who was now completely pale. Ruby and Yang looked horrified, while Crow, Raven and Taeyang looked ready to step in. Seeing this, Thanatos chuckled a bit before saying gently. Calm down, I'm not talking about summer. Many calmed down at those words, and a quick look at Blake and Weiss told Thanatos that they were relieved by those words. Of course, they would support their crushes in this. Love was such a appealing and dangerous thing. Then what were you talking about? Glinda asked him with a frown of confusion, breaking the tiny silence that followed his talk. By killing the god of light and aspiring his powers, I became the sole entity in this world which isn't good. Why? Weiss asked him with nothing but pure curiosity. Life and death are two different aspects of the world, they cannot be combined, it's like the yin and yang. Don't you dare make a pun right now, young lady. Thanatos began to say before looking over at a certain blonde at the last part. Yang pouted at him for ruining her fun but nodded her head in reluctant acceptance while everyone glanced at her with amusement clear on their faces. As I was saying, life and death are not supposed to be in one entity, Thanatos said calmly to change the subject and return to the main reason of his visit. Blanche's eyes widened and she realized what he wanted. You are looking for someone to take the mantle of embodiment of life. Everyone widened their eyes at those words as they looked at Thanatos with shock. Indeed, the embodiment of death said with a nod as he looked at everyone present with a serious expression on his face, showing them the gravity of the situation. How will you do that? I mean, finding the right person, Pyrrha asked him with a serious expression on her face. With a smile, Thanatos raised a hand where, in his palm, appeared a ball of light. At the sight of it, Sienna, Winter and Willow gaped in shock while the others stared in silent contemplation. After all, they had already seen it when Thanatos absorbed it after he defeated the god of light. Behold the power of life and creation, the embodiment of death declared seriously as he looked at everyone while holding the ball in his hand. Quick question, what would happen if one of us absorb it? Rwby asked him with slight curiosity and concern. They all could feel the power radiating from that small ball, and while it was a bit intoxicating, no one made a move to touch it. Well, in short, you will have as much power as me, but you will be able to control life instead of death. You will also be able to create whatever you want, but most of all you will be immortal. It doesn't sound so bad, Nora began to say before shivering when she saw the look on Thanatos' face. Immortality has a price. Sure, you will not age, but you will have to suffer. If you have children, you will see them grown, have children who will groan, and you will watch them die of old age while you still look fresh. A long silence followed the declaration as they looked back and forth between one another, thinking about what was said. Raven might be power hungry, but even her didn't want it to live forever. In her mind, death was a natural part of life and something normal. Many of the adults were thinking the same while the youngsters were still debating on what to do. Rwby was talking with her teammates while John was discussing with Nora, Ren, and Pyrrha. Emerald, Blanche and Amber were also chatting with one another. After a moment of thoughts, they looked back at Thanatos still holding the ball in his hand. We do not want it, Rwby spoke for not only her but her team as well. Jan, Blake and Weiss nodded their heads to show their agreement. We refuse it as well. John's voice sounded firm as he looked at the embodiment of death with a serious expression on his face. Thanatos smiled at them with pride in his eyes before looking at the other people present. The adults all shook their heads and he instantly knew what it meant. Nodding at this in understanding, the embodiment of death then looked at the remaining people, Amber, Emerald and Blanche. What say you? He asked them with a raised brow, having a slight idea of what they were about to answer, or at least what he thought they would answer. I have already the ability to go visit you whenever I want, and I am already friend with you. It's all I want, that and my gorgeous Emerald, of course, Amber began to say to Thanatos before cooing the last part at the green-haired thief, who shot her a warm smile despite blushing a bit. The embodiment of death then looked at Blanche when the white wolf fauna spoke again. I will do it. Not many people seemed surprised by the words. Are you sure? Thanatos asked her with a serious expression on his face. Yes, I have no family left in this world and I want to be close to the man I love more than anything, Blanche explained with nothing but sincerity before adding with confidence. And if it means being immortal to stand by your side, then so be it. Thanatos smiled warmly at the wolf faunus before nodding his head in acceptance. Very well, he said with a sigh before gently tossing the ball of light toward Blanche, who didn't have the time to blink when the say ball slowly entered her body. Screams of agony escaped her mouth as a feeling of pain like never before started to spread through her body to her very soul. Blanche! Ms. Moonflower! People cried out in alarm but were stopped by a bright light that caused many to turn around, hissing in pain. For a moment, Blanche's screams were the only things people could hear from the white wolf faunus. As the light was becoming brighter and brighter to the point, Thanatos himself had to turn around to avoid being blinded by it. After what looked like an eternity, the light faded and everyone was allowed to look again. At first, they had to blink to be sure that their eyes weren't damaged by the bright light of earlier, but, once they were sure everything was good, they looked toward Blanche only to gasp in shock at what they saw. Blanche Moonflower hadn't changed a lot physically well except the size and her eyes. She was no longer a young 6 feet 2 inches wolf faunus, now she looked about 11 feet tall and her eyes, now pupilless, looked like living yellowish fires. But what caught everyone's attention was not her size or eyes but the appealing armor she was wearing. Imagine Athena cloth in Saint Seiya the Lost Canvas with wing-shaped hair clips instead of the original helmet and a rapier instead of the shield and staff. Made of gold and white, this armor gave the impression that Blanche was a goddess descended from heaven to mingle with common mortals. The people present were in awe at Blanche's new appearance, but the most surprised person present was without contest the white wolf faunus herself. She looked at her new body and armor with stars in her eyes before looking up at Thanatos, who had a look of happiness and satisfaction on his face before he cleared his throat. Once everyone's eyes were on him, the embodiment of death spoke in a solemn tone. I welcome you to your new life, Blanche. Your old life is no more. You have now received the powers of life and creation, and they granted you the guardianship of all living forms on Remnant. Respect your nudity, protect the balance of this world and enjoy your immortality with pride and dignity. Blanche's eyes watered as she looked up at him, and he gave her a warm smile in response before he found himself being hugged tightly by a crying white wolf faunus. Ignoring the cheers of happiness and the congratulations from the other occupants of the room, the two immortals simply hugged one another happily. They now knew that they would be together for all eternity, and they were fine with it. 11 years. It had been 11 years since Thanatos defeated the god of light and the god of darkness. 11 years since the lovely Blanche Moonflower became the embodiment of life. So many things happened since that day. Thanato and Blanche decided to help in the reconstruction, much to the appreciation of many people. The former used his magic to rebuild some of the destroyed buildings, but places such as the police station were left behind. Why? Because Blanche told him of the local policemen who were mostly racists and their treatments toward fauna-skinned. The policemen, of course, were angered by this but had cowered in fear when Thanatos started to sermon them for their actions. Speaking of Blanche, she became a really good deity. At first, she had been a bit overwhelmed by her new functions and her new powers as well, but as time passed, the gorgeous wolf faunus grew accustomed to it thanks to the tutelage of her lover Thanatos. The embodiment of death was surprised by how quickly she mastered her new gifts but didn't complain. In fact, he was proud of his apprentice, as barely a few months, 3 to be precise, later, she didn't needed his help anymore. Now she was equal with him in terms of power and strength and a natural in her use of magic. With her new statue as embodiment of life, Blanche knew that she couldn't reside permanently among the mortals, so she decided to move in with Thanatos, and after saying goodbyes to their friends, they left the mortal plane. Needless to say that the underworld had changed drastically after Blanche's arrival. Why? Apparently when Blanche saw how Thanatos' kingdom looked like, she had stared at it with a blank expression on her face before looking at him to say bluntly, "This place is as cold and intimidating as you are." Thanatos, of course, denied it, and it led to them having their first argument. After a few minutes, the embodiment of death bowed to her as he lost the argument, agreeing to reshape this place. A part of him was reluctant in doing so, but the other part wanted to please Blanche. Besides, he should have seen it coming with her moving with him. For the next few days, the two lovers used their powers to completely change the area. Only the palace was untouched as Blanche adored it. She particularly loved the architecture of the building, and its inside was also to her liking. What she also liked was the concept of the 4 doors. Anyway, after days of magical works and several discussion, Thanatos and Blanche were satisfied with the results. Before, the underworld was a void-like space, with reddish-pink sky and small rocky islands floating in the air. But now, it looked more welcoming and far nicer than its previous state. Where previously stood nothing but air and dark ground, now stood fields of green grass and appealing flowers of white, pink and yellow. We could also see hills and forests surrounding the palace, and at front of the staircase was a large circular fountain where water poured out of the mouth of a statue which strangely looked like a wolf. Far away from there, a large and wide river filled with crystal water could be seen flowing. The sound of water was simply soothing, and Thanatos had to admit that so far, the changes were good. Later, Blanche used her powers to create a fake sun so days and night could be clearly shown in the underworld. Thanatos himself had found it really useful, while cursing himself for not having thought of that sooner. The wolf Faunus also decided to create a little garden to give a personal touch at the palace. Thanatos had been intrigued by her idea and soon enough accepted. A fundamental rule: always keep your girl happy. The embodiment of death had decided to let her create the garden as it was her idea, and the results have been really amazing. Situated at the back of the palace, the garden was really big and wide, maybe as wide as the Quidditch pitch, but much more appealing to look at, a large field of green grass where flowers of different varieties and colors could be seen there and then. But what really caught the eye was the big tree standing in the middle of the garden. It was a magnolia tree with pink and white flowers. Even Salem had nothing bad to say about the changes Blanche made. Speaking of the former Queen of Grimm, she was now accustomed to her life in the underworld and looked happier than ever. Salem took her new role as Guardian of Limbo really seriously, and so far was doing a great job. Some of the souls present liked her, and it was not rare to see her entertaining them every now and then. Without the curse hanging on her head, the former Queen of Grimm could release her kind and patient nature. Of course, from time to time, she would pass some time with her daughters in Elysium. As time passed, she and Blanche became really good friends and could sometimes be seen chatting with one another, talking about whatever they wanted. Which was good, as it would have been terrible if these two couldn't stand one another. Anyway, another thing that changed was the fact both women knew his past. How did they know? After months of uncertainty, Thanatos decided to reveal the truth to not only Blanche but Salem as well, and needless to say that both of them were shocked to hear that once he had been a human being, a magical one at that. They promised to not tell anyone, as the embodiment of death humbly asked them not to. In exchange, he would told them everything he knew about his former world, which he did. Blanche, after hearing his description on some of the creatures he told them about, had an idea. What if the underworld could host some of those creatures? After all, the mortal plane had living beings a part of humans and faunus, then why not the realm of the dead? After telling her idea to both her lover and Salem, both of them agreed that it was a magnificent idea, and so they went to work, or more like Blanche went to work with the help of Thanatos. Before creating the creatures who will live in the underworld, the two had to decide on which ones to make. Thanatos refused to have acromantulas in the area as he had a bad memory of the giant spiders. Blanche agreed as she understood his point of view. After some discussion, they finally agreed of a small lists of candidates: unicorns, griffins, measles, hippogriffs, dryads, mermaids, hippocampus and pegasi. Of course, normal birds and fishes will be added. Salem had been confused by some of the creatures on the list, and after some explanation, she thought it was a good idea to have some running around. It took Blanche a week, but in the end, she managed to create the creatures in question, and it was Thanatos that placed them in their respective area. Never before the underworld had looked so alive. It was rich of a fauna the mortal plane didn't possess. Sure, Elysium was filled with creatures as well, but they were normal animals, not mystical ones. Salem herself was stunned by the new change and got to keep one of the new creatures as a pet, an hippogriff she named Silverwing. But things had not only changed in the underworld, but the mortal plane as well. How so? Thanks to the reporter, everyone now knew of the existence of Thanatos, and needless to say that the repercussions were abysmal. With the revelation of death having a physical body and being the judge of the souls, many people started to think about their actions or what they should do with this knowledge. Some people thought the media to be fake, but most of them didn't, and so decided it was time to change things. When Blanche was revealed to the people of Remnant that she was now the embodiment of life, apparently someone had seen her ascension and had told the media point of views were mixed. The racists thought it was outrageous that the representative life was a member of the lesser species, but many stayed neutral. Many girls had been jealous at Blanche for having the hot scary guy all for herself, but they would be lying to themselves if they said it wasn't romantic. After all, the two of them would live together for eternity. If it is not romantic, then I don't know what that is. However, our immortals didn't care about what people said about that. They had each other, and that all mattered. Sadly, they decided to stop coming to the mortal plane until things would get better, as they didn't want to be mobbed by people. Try to guess why. Team Rwby, Team JNPR, Emerald, Amber, Summer, who had been given a second chance in life by Thanatos, Glinda, the rest of Beacon's staff and all the people close to them understood their decisions even if it saddened them. The Fall Maiden was still allowed to come whenever she wanted, but in the end, Amber asked Thanatos if it was possible to include more people than her for visit time. The embodiment of death had hesitated at first but then shook his head in response. When asked why, his answer caused everyone to nod their heads in acknowledgement. If he allowed it and one of them accidentally let it slip, chaos would break loose and their lives will turn to the worse, as many people would want to get such a gift. Amber was now the only person able to visit the underworld without consequences. However, Blanche had decided that it might be a good idea for them to come to them, but in another appearance, to avoid being mobbed. The idea was accepted unanimously, and from then on, the two immortals would come to the mortal plane when they had free times. However, it was difficult given their responsibilities for not only our favorite couple but also for their friends. Once school was rebuilt, classes started again and their mortal friends were busier than ever to catch up what they missed. Amber restarted her own classes with Emerald as her assistant. Willow, Schnee, Ironwood and his clowns along with Penny went back to Atlas along with the other students of Atlas Academy. Winter, much to everyone's shock, had started to date Sienna Khan, and so far, things were good. They even got married at one point. The students of Haven and Shade Academy had left to their respective schools as well. Gyra and Callie returned to Menagerie after staying a few days with their daughter. Meanwhile, the whole world was coming to terms about what had happened so far. Of course, despite the knowledge that immortal beings lived among them, life hadn't changed much. Despite it, the two immortals always managed to find time to visit their friends in the mortal plane. For years after the Battle of Beacon, Thanatos and Blanche, who had turned into different forms, went to the academy to congratulate their friends when they graduated with flying colors. Team Rwby and Team JNPR became official huntsmen and huntresses afterwards. But it didn't stop there. The two also attended the weddings of John and Pyrrha, Weiss and Ruby, Blake and Young, Amber and Emerald, Nora and Ren, and Winter and Sienna. Yes, these two got married after some time. However, during those times, a miracle also took place. Blanche became pregnant with Thanatos' children. Yes, you hear me right, barely a year after becoming embodiment of life, the white wolf faunus was discovered to be carrying lives within her. The embodiment of death had been ecstatic at the news, and when they heard about it, their friends congratulated them. Thanatos had done everything he could so his girl would have anything she wanted and be as comfortable as possible. Salem had teasingly commented that he looked adorable being all worried like that, which earned her a glare from her boss. Of course she wasn't affected by it, much to his chagrin. 9 months later, Thanatos and Blanche became the proud parents of two adorable little ones. Of course they were like their parents equals deities. But let me present you the kids. The first one was a girl named Hedwig, in memory of Thanatos' loyal familiar, who was ironically a snowy owl faunus with black and white hair, yellow eyes, and feathers covering her arms. The second kid was a boy named Zephyr, who inherited the white hair of his mother and blue eyes. Thanatos had questioned his wife about it, and Blanche told him that her grandmother had blue eyes. Unlike Hedwig, he was human in appearance. 2 years later, Blanche gave birth to more children. The first child was a girl whose name was Iris. She somehow got dark green hair and yellow-green eyes. Like Zephyr, she was human in appearance. Like Hedwig, she was a faunus but not a snowy owl but a doe. It had been a shock until Thanatos remembered that his mother's patronus was a doe. It might have influenced it. The second child was a boy by the name of Perseus who inherited his father's black hair but thankfully not as messier and instead, looked as silky as his mother's. He also inherited the same blue eyes than Zephyr. Like his brothers, he was human. The third little one was a girl whose name was Freya who inherited her mother's white hair and her father's green eyes. Like her sisters, she was a faunus, a snow panther faunus, and was the smallest of the group. The fourth and last child was a boy by the name of Orion in memory of Sirius Orion Black who got his mother's yellow eyes and his father's black hair. Unlike his brothers, he was a faunus, a brown bear faunus. None of their children was a wolf faunus, which was shocking but not a really bad thing. Thanatos and Blanche loved their little ones dearly and the former always tried his best to be with them despite his duties to perform. Of course, when they were unavailable, Salem would act as their babysitter, something the former Queen of Grimm didn't mind at all. The embodiments of life and death had, without a doubt, presented their little ones to their friends who had all cooed at how cute they were. Seeing the little ones had given some of them the idea of having children of their own. And they did well of them did. Weiss and Rwby adopted a little girl they named Crystal. Young and Blake adopted a pair of twins, a boy and a girl named Caden and Jade respectively. Pyrrha and John were the proud parents of a strong little girl they named Aries. Ren and Nora decided to wait before thinking of the possibility of having children of their own. The same was said to Winter and Sienna, who were far too focused on their jobs at the moment. As the years passed, life on Remnant turned calmer. Sure, the creatures of Grimm were still annoyances, but thanks to the courage and strength of their protectors, humanity and Faunaskin could live in relative peace. Even better, thanks to the new change, more rights were given to the Faunus despite the few protests from some people. Which was really good. Not only for the mortals but for Thanatos and Blanche as well. Now how long it will take before another conflict break this peace? Who know, but hopefully it will not be too soon. But now 11 years after the Battle of Beacon, things still looked good in the mortal plane. But it was the underworld that interested us. In the hall, sitting on his throne, was the familiar form of Thanatos, who was like usual, wearing his armor. Like he promised to Blanche a long time ago, he hadn't rebuilt his helmet, which clearly showed the symbol on his forehead. The embodiment of death had a calm look on his face as his eyes were closed. He was relaxing. A few moments ago, Salem came to tell him that some souls were ready to be judged again, and he did. Some were allowed into Elysium to be reunited with their loved ones, but others weren't so lucky. Heck, a few even ended up in the Inferno. Once his work was done, he had allowed Salem to go to Elysium so she could pass some times with her daughters. Which allowed him to finally take a break. But once again, the universe had other plans. Barely a minute later, he felt someone tugging his right arm, and he opened his neon green eyes to see his eldest daughter, Hedwig, looking up at him with her yellow eyes. She, like the rest of her siblings, were all 10 years old, but she was more mature than them. The embodiment of death had lost the number of time he had found her in the library while her siblings were playing outside the palace that had been reshaped to add more rooms. Hedwig was a bookworm and a living encyclopedia. Even worse, sometimes she talked like an old man would. It was no wonder then Blanche and Thanatos made her the goddess of knowledge and wisdom. "What can I do for you, dear?" he asked his eldest daughter with a warm smile on his face. "Mother wanted to see you outside," Hedwig answered respectfully and in a calm tone. Shooting a small glare at her, the embodiment of death chuckled before going back on his feet. "Very well, I have some free times anyway. Are you going to join me?" Like he expected, the snowy owl Faunus shook her head in response. "Sorry father, but I found this amazing book." "I understand your love for books, dear, but as your father, I order you to go outside and play with your brothers and sisters," he told her in a kind but stern tone. Hedwig wanted to protest but wisely chose to nod her head in acceptance. Sighing, Thanatos then gently putted a hand on her shoulder before saying kindly, you can still read the book later if you want. The owl fauna smiled to brighten a bit at those words and nodded at him with a smile. Ruffling her hair with fondness and ignoring the whine she released at that, father and daughter then left the great hall to end straight toward the palace's garden. As they stepped outside the building, Hedwig rushed forward, leaving behind Thanatos, who took a moment to stare at the reddish-pink sky of the underworld where we could see some black shapes flying in the air. Even if it had been 11 years, he was still not getting used in seeing griffins or hippogriffs or pegasi flying in the sky of the underworld. Shaking his head, the embodiment of death then looked away from the sky to look at the garden where he saw his entire family gathered there. Hedwig was sitting against the magnolia tree, chatting with her sister Iris and her brother Zephyr. Perseus was playing with his brother while little Freya was with her mother. Blanche was not wearing her armor, but normal clothes consisted of a long white robes and nice shoes. Thanatos smiled as he decided to join in by changing his attire. No more was he wearing his armor, he was now wearing dark robes similar to the ones he wore in the wizarding world. Still smiling, the embodiment of death stepped closer and Blanche's wolf ears twitched before her yellow eyes landed on him. Well, look who decided to join us, Blanche greeted him with a wolfish smirk. Ha ha ha, really funny, but if you prefer I can still go back inside. Thanatos began to say, only to stop when someone hugged his leg tightly. You stay. Freya pouted at him as her spotted fluffy tail wagged behind her. Chuckling as his youngest daughter, the embodiment of death gently picked her up before hugging her. I'm no going anywhere, princess. The snow panther Faunus smiled at her father before hugging him back, her arms wrapped around his neck. Of all his children, Freya was the most affectionate one and the most appealing of his girls. That's why both parents decided to make her the goddess of beauty and love. Daddy, another voice echoed from nearby, and Thanatos turned his head to see Iris rushing toward him with a bright smile. Little Iris was not only a careful and gentle girl but really close with plants and animals. Her parents noticed the way the many creatures of the underworld reacted to her, and once they had caught her petting the belly of a griffin. The plants themselves seemed to move when she was around. That's why she was given the title of Goddess of Nature. The dove Faunus barreled into him and he found himself on his back, laughing all the while as he was pinned by two of his daughters under the amused eyes of Blanche Moonflower. Boys! We need your help here. Iris called out mischievously to her brothers, who stopped their game to look at them. Coming! Perseus cried out as he rushed toward his father and sisters, with Orion following him in a slower pace. Perseus was as carefree as Freya and Iris but could be calm and collected when necessary. He also showed his parents that he seemed to have an affinity with water, and he showed it one day during a game of hide-and-seek. He hid in the great river and asked the mermaids there to not tell his siblings about his location, which they did. After 2 hours, the parents went to look for him and were shocked once they find him. After a small talk, he had been punished but was allowed to go to the water whenever he wanted. He was the best swimmer of all their children. Both that and his ability to control and breath underwater were the reasons he was given the title of God of Water. Orion was much calmer than Perseus, but like the rest of his siblings had a mischievous streak. He was also the strongest of them all but knew how to control his strength. Thanatos and Blanche were amazed by how humble he was. He also had a sharp mind when it came to defend something he believed was right. One day, during a game between Iris and Perseus, things almost turned bad after Iris won the game. Orion was the one who stopped the fight and managed to stop both parties without using his strength, only words. He also reprimanded Perseus for having moved a piece they played chess when Iris looked away. Thanks to his actions, he was given the title of God of Justice and Peace. Back to topic. The embodiment of death yelped in surprise when he found himself pinned by not 2 but 4 children, and this time Blanche couldn't hide her amusement as she laughed loudly from her seat. I can't take it. There are too many of you. Come on, pick on somebody your own size. Love help. Thanatos dramatically said as he struggled to get out of his children's grip. I don't think I will love you, look so cute right now, Blanche said with a hum and a wolfish smirk as her eyes shined with mischief. Laying against the trunk of the magnolia tree, Zephyr and Hedwig were looking at the scene with amusement while making no move to help their father from his predicament. Thanatos then used another tactic, putting a hand on his heart. He let his face fall on the side while dramatically pulling out his tongue, giving the impression he was dead. The kids stopped moving as they gazed at him. "Daddy, you are not dead," Freya said as she looked at him, lowering her head closer. "No." Thanatos suddenly cried out as with a smirk as he swiftly turned his head toward her, causing the children to jump away from him with loud laugh. Zephyr and Hedwig also giggled in amusement, but they tried to hide it by covering their mouths. "All right children, that enough. Give some room to your old dad," Blanche told the children with a small grin. Thanatos shot her a fake glare as he hissed back, "I'm not old. You are millenniums old, honey." "So yes, you are old compared to us," the wolf faunus retorted with a coo as she patted the top of his head tauntingly. "Is it, pick on Thanatos Day?" the embodiment of death grumbled to himself while shooting a glare at his wife. "Yes." All the children, minus Hedwig and Zephyr, cried out at the same time alongside their mother before giggling loudly. Thanatos grumbled something under his beard as he pinched the bridge of his nose with irritation. However, a smirk soon grew on his face as an idea passed through his mind. "Very well then, no cake for you," he said with a shrug. The laughers stopped quickly and the children Perseus, Orion, Iris and Freya all stared at him with horror while Hedwig and Zephyr looked at one another with amusement. Their younger siblings liked cakes of all kinds, so it was no surprise that they all had this reaction. "No. We will be good, please Dad/Daddy," they cried out in horror, which caused Thanatos to smirk at them as they went as far as kneeling before him with pleading looks on their faces. Blanche rolled her eyes in amusement before saying, "Don't worry dears. There are plenty of cakes for you." The children cheered at their mother, who shot a triumphant look at a certain embodiment of death who shot her an fake annoyed glare in response. "Can we have some now, Mommy?" Freya asked her mother with cute kitty eyes, which was quickly mirrored by the rest of her siblings. Blanche smiled tenderly at her little ones before kissing them on the forehead one by one. "Of course, my loves." "Thank you, Mommy." Perseus, Orion, Iris and Freya said at the same time before rushing back inside the palace toward the kitchen. Thanatos rolled his eyes in amusement before turning his head toward his eldest children. "Make sure these four don't eat too much, dinner is in an hour or two after all." Zephyr and Hedwig nodded their heads before bowing their heads at their parents and going after their younger siblings. Zephyr, like his sister, was really protective of his siblings and was the calmer boy of the group. However, he was also the dreamers of the group, and sometimes, we could see him with his head in the clouds. His control over air and magic were also impressive. One day, he used his powers to fly. He even became untouchable. Because of this, his parents gave him the title of God of Air and Wind. As the two disappeared out of sight, Thanatos looked at Blanche, who both shared a smile before kissing one another. "Maybe we should go after them, don't you think, love?" the embodiment of death asked his wife tenderly. "We should, handsome," the white wolf faunus cooed back with a warm smile before the two of them re-entered their home. "Let's hope those little rascals leave them some cake." So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lion Heart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.